Alright, this is Flash Basics 3, Timing and Workflow Techniques. So the first thing we're going to do is go right up to our toolbar here and select the oval tool, and we're going to create a circle on our stage. So hold shift down to constrain the X and Y dimensions, and we'll just create a circle. And then I'm going to hit Z on my keyboard for the magnifying glass and just select the region to bring my stage up closer. So right now we have artwork which we've gone over in the last video. So what we can do is select the circle. One click selects the fill. 2 clicks selects the fill and the line, and we can press either F8 on our keyboard, or we can right click on the circle and go convert to symbol, and you can see the shortcut is F8. As soon as we do that, we have this window that appears, and it gives us an option to name the symbol. So let's just call it ball, and we want to make sure the type is on graphic, and then we'll press OK. And as soon as we do that, we'll see that this ball symbol appears in our library, and there's a picture of it. And then here's the actual ball right here. That's our symbol. So we can actually drag that onto our stage at any time that we like. As soon as we've created this symbol, the artwork went inside the symbol, and it'll come along for the ride with the symbol wherever we put it. So to get inside the symbol, to adjust the artwork, we can double click on it, and you'll see now we're inside the ball. And now it says Scene 1 and Ball. So now we're back to the area where we can adjust the artwork if I want to. To get back to Scene 1, we can just double click on the stage anywhere in this white area, and you'll see the symbol is here again, and the artwork's been adjusted. So basically we can adjust any artwork at any time inside any symbol. The artwork's basically inside the symbol. So I'm just going to undo this, Control Z. Put that ball back to normal, and we'll go back to, you can either click on Scene 1. It's the same as double clicking in the white area here. It goes back to Scene 1, and we're back to where our symbol is. So the way that we're going to move these symbols around is we're going to use the free transform tool, which we find here in our toolbar, or we can press Q on the keyboard. And then as soon as we do that, we'll see the manipulation box appear. I don't know if it's actually called the manipulation box, but I'm going to call it a manipulation box. Before we start our ball bounce, I want to explain the difference between frames, keyframes, and key poses. Each one of these squares on the timeline is a frame. You can think of each one of these frames as a frame from a reel of film or a piece of paper. Let's think of them as pieces of paper. So these are frames. Keyframes is what we have here on frame 1. As soon as we created the circle, Flash created a keyframe on frame 1. And as we set more keyframes along the timeline, you'll see a lot more of these dots. That's just how Flash represents a key being set on a frame. So these are frames. This is a keyframe, and a key pose is something that refers to traditional animation, where a key pose is basically the poses that we're going to set, the extreme poses that we're going to set in our motion that define the actual main action of the motion. But you'll understand that more as we go along, and I'll explain it as we go. So in Flash, if you try to scrub along the timeline, you can't. You have to actually insert active keyframes. So these keyframes are all actually inactive right now. So to create active keyframes, go to a frame where you want your animation to go up to. We'll just go to 30 for now. It can be changed later. Or if you right click and say Insert Frames, you'll see that a gray bar has been placed up to frame 30, and now you can scrub along this timeline. So basically it just created active frames that we can now animate our symbol on. Today's session deals with timing, slow in and slow out, and stretch and squash. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to animate this ball bouncing without any animation principles at all, and then we're going to export a video. And then what we'll do is add animation principles to our animation. Then we can export another video and see the difference. So we already have our first keyframe on frame 1, and we have our symbol created, so we're ready to go. Make sure your free transform tool is activated. And we're going to go, let's go 4 frames down the timeline. So the hotkey for stepping down the timeline is the greater than and less than keys right next to the M on your keyboard. So let's just step to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Select that keyframe and press F6 on your keyboard to set a keyframe, or you can right click and go down to Insert Keyframe. So now that we've set a keyframe, we can move this symbol. Make sure you press V on your keyboard or activate your selection tool on the toolbar. So this will be our key pose number 2. So select your symbol. We can move this straight down just by clicking and dragging it, or you can hold shift down on your keyboard and use the up and down arrow keys. So at this point we've set our second pose, our second key pose. So if we drag it up to 1, 2. So you'll notice there's a dot which represents our first keyframe, and then a dot which represents our second keyframe. But you'll notice there's a little square here. All that square is in Flash, I usually just ignore that square. It just means that's the end of this motion from frame 1 to 4. This is one motion, and the square just represents that's the end of that motion. Just ignore it, and we'll just look at our dots, which is these keyframes here. So now that we've set our second pose, let's turn onion skinning on. Looks like two little squares at the bottom of the timeline area. As soon as you turn that on, you'll notice you can see your last pose. This is great because it gives us the impression that we're looking through pages of paper as you would in traditional animation on a light table. You would see right through your paper. And you'll also notice when you turn the onion skinning on, we have this range slider that appears above our timeline. You can expand or contract this range. Let's put it all the way to 1 by grabbing these little dots in the brackets. So just make sure that it encompasses both drawings. And as we go on, we'll stretch it out. We can grab this and stretch it out so it encompasses all of our drawings. And we'll be turning onion skinning on and off as we go at different parts. So now we have frame 2. 1, 2, 3, 4 down the timeline. And let's press F6 to set another keyframe. And this will be a key pose number 3. So I'm going to use the shift arrow key down, or you can just drag your ball down. So let's space these evenly apart. So this is 3, the top one is 2, and 1. So now we have pose 1, pose 2, and pose 3, all evenly spaced apart. So again, the greater than key, 1, 2, 3, 4. Select the timeline and F6. I'm going to set our next pose. Shift arrow key down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to do one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4. F6, and we'll move that down. Okay, well, we ran out of space here, but you get the idea. Okay, so let's turn onion skinning off for a moment, and now we can just play this by hitting enter on your keyboard. Okay, so we see our 5 key poses. Now, to in between this, normally in traditional animation you would have these 2 pages of paper, pose 1 and pose 2 being two pages of paper. In between pose 1 and 2 we have 1, 2, 3 in betweens. We would have to actually grab 3 extra sheets of paper and in between the drawings between 1 and 2. But in the software, in Flash and any other animation software, it'll do the in-betweens for you. So to do that, highlight a frame anywhere in between pose 1 and 2 and right click, and we'll go down to create classic tween. And you'll see it's turned blue with an arrow indicating that it goes straight from pose 1 straight to pose 2. Now if we scrub over that, you can see it's been in-betweened. And if you turn your onion skinning on, you'll see all the in-betweens very evenly spaced apart because we evenly spaced apart key pose 1 and 2. So let's go through and classic tween all of these. And now we can see that our ball animates from top to bottom with all the in-betweens and the key poses set. Now we're going to cycle this. And the way to do that is to copy the second last key pose onto the other side of the last key pose, and we're going to continuously do that till we get to frame 1. So go to your second last key pose and go copy frame, and then go 4 over, paste. We'll go to pose 3, copy frame, paste. Paste, and we've run out of space, so we're going to have to increase our timeline a little bit, our active keys. So just right click down somewhere around 40 and go insert frame. We have 1 left to go. Copy frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, and paste frames. Alright, so you can just get rid of this last tweening at the end by right clicking and choosing remove tween. And this one doesn't have a tween, so let's tween that. Create classic tween. Alright, so now what we should have is our ball bouncing off the ground and coming right back to the top. So go to frame 1 and press enter. Okay, so this is a ball bounce without any animation principles employed whatsoever. Let's export a video. So go to File, Export, and Export Movie. So I already did one previous, so we'll just call it ball bounce underscore no principles or whatever you'd like. Just make sure it says no principles so we'll know the difference. And just choose any folder that you like on your machine and press save. Okay, so go to the folder where you saved it, double click on it, and you'll see this Flash SWF movie file playing this this very boring ball bounce without any animation principles whatsoever. Alright, let's put that away. Okay, so let's remove these tweens. Just right click anywhere between the key poses and choose remove tween. Okay, and we're going to keep pose 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And let's drag over the rest. Just click on this extra one here. That'd be pose 6. And we're going to right click, clear keyframe. There we go. So now we're back to just our ball just dropping and hitting the ground. The first thing we're going to do on this ball bounce is we're going to ease out of the top of the bounce. So when we want a motion to move slower, we have to talk about timing and spacing. We want to space our drawings closer together and add more in-betweens. So let's turn our onion skinning back on so we can see what we're doing. Take the bracket down to pose 2 and make sure it goes all the way to 1. We want to be able to see pose 1 and 2. Alright, so for pose 2, let's make sure it's activated with your free transform tool. And again, you can drag it or shift arrow key up. I'm going to bring it closer to pose 1. So this is going to cause the ball to move slower. So by placing the drawings closer together and increasing the amount of in-betweens or space between them on the timeline, it'll actually cause the ball to move slower because there's more drawings actually being shown. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab all the keys after pose 2, click on pose 2, shift click on the last pose by holding shift down and clicking. We'll select this whole region and we're just going to drag it over. Let's drag it over 3 or 4 frames. So right now we're blocking out our animation. We're going to block it out and then we're going to check it and then we'll refine it. So pose 1 and pose 2 now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, has 6 in-betweens in between pose 1 and 2. And the drawings are closer together. So that's definitely going to cause it to move slower. And you don't have to do this, but I'll just show you. I'm going to add the classic tweens to it, shut off my onion skinning, go to pose 1 and play it. You can see now that it moves very slow. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that classic tween. We'll tween everything at the end, turn onion skinning back on, and we're going to set pose 3 now. Okay, so we can see pose 2 and pose 3. Let's drag our bracket right to our onion skinning bracket right to the end, right to pose 1 so we can see all 3 drawings. So I'm going to grab pose 3, I'm going to move it up closer to pose 2. So this will be like our 3rd sheet of paper or our 3rd key pose that we're setting. Now I'm going to move it farther away from pose 2 because I want this to start to move a little bit faster. As the ball drops, it gains velocity. Now as the ball starts to drop, we're going to add some stretch to it. And then as it impacts the ground, it's going to squash. So one very important thing to remember when we're stretching and squashing is to maintain volume. And when I say maintain volume, I mean you don't want your object to appear as if it's becoming smaller or larger. So if we stretch it, or if we squash it a little bit in the X dimension, it actually looks like it's shrinking. If I did it even more, this ball actually looks smaller. But if I stretch it in equal amount, approximately equal amount, in the Y dimension, it's actually not. It still looks like it's the same size, but it's just deformed into a different shape. So that's a little extreme. Okay, so let's squash it a bit in the X dimension and stretch it an equal amount in the Y dimension. So this is our 4th pose. I'm actually going to bring that a little bit closer down. Okay, so I'm going to go right to pose 5, our 5th and final pose. This is the pose where the ball actually makes impact with the ground. And again, we're going to use squashing here to give it the impression that it's actually hit the ground and made impact. But before I do that, I'm going to move the pivot point on my symbol. This white circle right in the center of the ball is my pivot point, and we really should have done this at the beginning. Turn on your Snap to Objects tool. It looks like a magnet. And basically all that does is it snaps anything you're moving to an invisible grid on the stage. So let's snap it right down to the bottom of our symbol and leave it there. You can turn Snap to Objects off. And we're going to grab the top manipulator. Let's squash it down in Y and stretch it out in X. Approximate equal amount. And this is our impact pose. Now let's turn off our onion skinning and watch this. Okay, that looks a little better. It looks like it's gaining velocity and slamming into the ground. So from pose 3 to pose 4, it actually is supposed to be getting much faster. So we're going to decrease the amount of in-betweens. So click on your second last key pose and hold shift down and click on your last one. And let's drag these closer together. We're only going to give it one in between, so they'll be 2 frames apart. And then the last pose from pose 4 to 5, this should be very quick as the ball impacts the ground. The ball is gaining speed as it gets closer to the ground, so I'm going to shift this key over and give it no in-betweens. Pose 5 will be right up next to pose 4. So if we play this again, enter. There, it looks like it's speeding up as it hits the ground and impacts the ground. So now let's turn our onion skinning off and let's in-between this. So again, placing your cursor anywhere between the 2 key poses and choose Create Classic Tween. Between pose 1 and 2, between pose 3 and 4. 4 and 5 are right butt up against each other, so there's no in-betweens at all. So let's play this now and see how it looks. So you can see that it hangs a bit at the top. This is because we have all these in-betweens. Think of each one of these as a piece of paper. So we're seeing more images of this ball play out for us at the beginning of this animation, and then less at the end. So these last 2, pose 4 and 5, are just 2 drawings. In my opinion, this hangs a little too much at the top, so I'm going to actually decrease the amount of in-betweens between pose 1 and 2 by selecting pose 2 and shift selecting pose 5. So we grab all of the poses except for the first one, and we're just going to drag it to the left to decrease the amount of in-betweens here between pose 2 and 1 and 2. Play that again, hit enter. Looks a little better. Okay, so let's cycle this now. I'm going to go to pose 4, copy frames, and paste it on the other side of pose 5. Paste frames. Let's copy pose 3, and that's 2. Make sure it's the same amount of frames apart as it is on the other side. Don't worry about that tweening. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So copy pose 2 and make sure there's 1, 2, 3 in betweens there. Should be the same distance apart. Paste, and then we'll grab 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and paste it. And you can just remove this tween here. All right, so let's watch this. Actually, sorry, you have to add the tween here. After you've finished copying and pasting all these keys, just make sure that your tweens are where they're supposed to be. And let's play this. Looks much better than our original ball bounce, but let's refine this a little further. I'd like to add a moving hold. We'll be talking more about moving holds as we get further in the program, but basically what a moving hold is, or let's just talk about what a hold is. A hold is when animation just freezes. So it's 2 drawings that are exactly the same, with a whole bunch of in-betweens in the middle that are exactly the same, and the image just freezes basically. So we're going to do a bit of a hold on the impact pose. We want our impact pose to hold, so we'll grab the pose after that, shift select the last pose, and drag it 1 to the left, and now we've created an in-between for our impact pose. But there's no we've created a space, but there's no we haven't tweened it or anything. So what'll happen if we play it is you'll see that the impact pose will just freeze, which actually doesn't look too bad because it only freezes for 1 frame. That's a hold. If we want to do a moving hold, what we can do is place your marker right in between the impact pose and the launch pose, and just give it a tiny bit. Actually, sorry, set a key. Press F6 to set a key, a new key. Now so now we basically have 2 keys that are exactly the same, and it's this impact pose. But on the second one, make sure it's selected, this new keyframe that we've set, and just give it a tiny bit, a very tiny bit of squash, and then just stretch it out an equal amount. So when we drag over these 2 now, we'll see it just move a tiny bit, and that's a moving hold. It helps just give it a little bit more appeal and of a feeling of impact and weight. So now as you play it, you watch the impact pose, it looks much better. It feels better overall. So make sure your onion skinning is turned on, and we can see that we've slowed out of pose 1. Basically that's how we've adjusted our timing. Slowing in and slowing out is a timing adjustment. We've stretched and squashed our ball to create the illusion of velocity and impact. We've done all this through timing by spacing our drawings farther apart in some areas and closer together. So it's the spacing of the actual object on your stage and the amount of in-betweens that you give them. Less in-betweens and drawings spaced far apart give it a faster movement. More in-betweens and drawings placed closer together give it a slower movement. So we've covered timing, stretch and squash, and easing in and out. Now let's render this out. Go to Export, File Export, Export Movie, and let's name it Ball Bounce with Principles, and save it. Okay, so now let's go to our folder where we had those saved. The ball bounce with no principles, and the ball bounce with principles. In any animation software, you can make any objects move. The animation software is simply a tool, a medium or a tool that you use to create animation. But to create professional looking animation, you have to employ animation principles.